Adopting a plant-based diet is a trend that continues to grow in popularity. However, for people focused on muscle growth and strength due to their athletic pursuits, there may be concerns about whether their muscle development and sports performance are being compromised by eating predominantly protein from plant foods. In this podcast episode, I'll explore the fundamental differences between animal and plant-based proteins, discuss the primary supplements available for each type of protein, and review recent research on the effect of these different protein sources on muscle growth, strength, and physical performance. Protein is essential for the body as it is composed of amino acid building blocks that can be resynthesized into various functional and structural proteins. Some amino acids are essential because the human body either cannot produce them or cannot produce them in sufficient quantities. Animal-based protein foods typically supply biological complete protein containing all the required amino acid building blocks. Plant-based proteins are also valuable sources of protein. Although some plant proteins may be low in certain essential amino acids, combining different sources can provide a complete amino acid profile. For example, rice and beans together form a complete protein meal. Furthermore, some plant proteins, such as soy and quinoa, are considered complete protein sources. Therefore, a vegetarian diet can provide adequate protein from a nutritional standpoint, meeting all of a person's protein needs. But what about in a sports setting, when protein requirements are typically higher and the athlete has a stronger focus on muscle growth and strength? This can be where athletes turn to protein supplements to help meet higher protein needs. The main type of animal-based protein supplements on the market are dairy-based, including the ever-popular whey and casein. Whey protein is absorbed faster than casein and is often used due to its availability as a byproduct of cheese manufacturing. Whey protein is noted for its strong anabolic effect on muscle growth due to its high leucine content. Leucine is an essential branch-chain amino acid that activates muscle protein synthesis via a signaling pathway called mTOR. For those interested in plant sources of protein, soy protein is a perennial popular pick. Soy protein is rapidly digested and comes available in a supplement form as both soy concentrate and soy isolate. Legume sources of protein are also growing in popularity for those seeking other plant-based sources of protein. One example is pea protein powder, which is absorbed faster than casein but slower than whey protein. Pea protein is naturally vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and is very low in its allergenic potential, so it works in almost any diet. Even lower quality proteins, such as those from wheat, can elicit a significant muscle protein synthesis response if consumed in large enough amounts. This suggests that overall adequate protein intake from a varied diet may be more important than the specific source of protein. Certainly, the world of elite sport is replete with athletes who are following vegetarian or vegan diets. So clearly, it is possible to excel at the highest level of sport without needing to eat animal-based foods, if that is an important health, environmental, religious, or ethical issue for you. But when comparing plant versus animal protein on muscle protein synthesis in clinical trials, it is important to know what the protein sources were, especially for the plant-based proteins, because of their highly variable amino acid compositions. For example, a recent review found that animal and plant proteins were similarly effective for maintaining muscle mass, yet all trials in this review provided soy protein as the plant protein intervention. So you can't apply these findings to all plant protein sources and assume that every plant protein is on par with soy protein. So that leads into the new research I want to profile in this podcast episode, which is a systematic review published in January of this year that set out to see how a range of animal and plant-based protein diets compared for their ability to improve muscle mass, muscle strength, and physical performance in both older and younger adults. In all, 43 randomized controlled trials were included in the review, and each trial included a direct comparison of an animal versus a plant protein intervention, where the additional protein was given either by a supplement or a whole food diet. For studies that use supplemental protein, it was milk protein as the source for the animal protein. And for plant protein supplements, it was soy, rice, pea, oat, potato, and chia seeds as the protein source. For whole food diets, varied protein sources were used, including meat, fish, and dairy foods for the animal protein study arm, or a vegan diet or high plant protein diet for the plant-based protein arms of the study. Trials ran from 4 weeks up to 2 years, and 10 trials were conducted in adults over the age of 60, with 32 trials in adults under 60 years of age, and overall 1,500 participants were included in the studies. And I'll link to this research in the show notes. So, what did the study find? When comparing all the animal protein interventions to all the plant protein interventions, animal protein did have a slight edge for building muscle mass compared to plant protein. But for more functional measures of muscle strength and general athletic performance, there was no significant differences between the protein sources. But even the finding that there was a small edge for animal protein on building muscle mass has some disclaimers. It was only seen in adults under the age of 60 and only in studies that did not use soy protein as the comparison plant protein source. When soy protein was the plant protein focus, it seemed to perform just as well as the animal-based protein sources. This shouldn't be too surprising because soy protein is considered a high-quality plant protein source and is a go-to protein food for many people on vegetarian diets. And it's plausible that the reason that the other plant-based protein foods may not have worked quite as well on muscle mass in those under 60 is simply because there are a lot less trials compared to those that use soy, making it harder to be confident that you're seeing a real effect or not. So let's wrap all this up. What to make of this new research? If I had to provide a firm conclusion based on the whole research field, I would be inclined to say that when it comes to muscle mass, animal protein in general may have a small edge, but that may apply only in certain circumstances depending on your age, activity levels, and even what plant protein source you want to compare it to. But muscle mass is just one measure of athletic performance goals. What really matters is how a higher protein diet translates into strength and physical function. And the research is saying that for that, protein source is likely not that important. What matters is hitting your protein goals and getting that from a variety of protein sources. If you follow an omnivore diet, then there is no shortage of high-quality protein foods and supplements to choose from. If you've adopted a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle, then probably the only consideration is to perhaps give soy foods and perhaps a soy protein supplement a higher priority in your diet. But let's not forget that all these recommendations are only on the diet side of the performance equation, because they won't be of a lot of use to you without the other side of the equation. And that's resistance training, and there is no natural supplement that will give you a shortcut to hard work in the gym. So that's it for today's show. You can find the show notes either in the app you're listening to this podcast on, or else head over to my webpage at thinkingnutrition.com.au and click on the podcast section to find this episode to read the show notes. If you find this podcast of value, then please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues. This all helps to increase the reach of the podcast, which means a big win for credible, evidence-based nutrition messages and making the world a slightly less confusing place. I'm Tim Crow, and you've been listening to Thinking Nutrition.